Hi, everyone. It's Deb Blum here, and I am really excited today to have Henry Yampolsky. Is that right? Yampolsky?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, great. Um, Hi.
Hi, Deb. It's so wonderful to be with you.
Yeah, likewise. I'm so glad to be talking to you today. I'm a little tongue-tied for some reason. So I am most excited to talk to you about a subject that's really, really near and dear to my heart, and I know it's near and dear to your heart, which is connecting
Mhm.
in these crazy times that we're in these times where we have these information silos, we have deep divisions, we have tremendous amounts of fear. So I'm excited to talk about that. And but maybe to provide a little context for people, you can share why you're the perfect person to be talking about this and a little bit about you.
Well, I don't know whether I am or am not a perfect person to talk about this, but for me, really, I've dedicated my life's work is leading transformative conversations. And I do that by serving as a mediator, as a conflict coach, working with conflicts, working with very, very difficult conversations. And previously, I've ran my own consulting company, and now I get to do this work in a higher education setting. I work for Office of Equity and Accessibility at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia. So I have dedicated my life to really creating space for people to have conversations, to have difficult conversations, and to connecting with each other. And for me, this work is very, very meaningful. And this work is an integral part of my spiritual practice.
Mm.
This is the way I show up to the world.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, yeah, so you bring a great deal of experience as well as you are, I know your own passion around this. And well, so when I when I look at what's going on in the world right now, um, it hurts my heart to
Mhm.
see so much divisiveness, and especially the more that I've learned that deep down we all do want to connect, and that
Mhm.
most of the reasons why we're not connecting is because of our defensiveness, because we have little tender hearts. Every one of us has a tender heart, except big tender hearts, and that it's really not what we think it is. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts about what's going on right now, and what is needed?
Mm. So, what's going on right now is that each of us, many of us, are getting very, very attached to a particular narrative.
Yeah.
And whenever we attach to a particular narrative, that narrative becomes an identity. What that means is that we identify as a certain story that sometimes we make up, sometimes someone else makes up, sometimes we pick up from various sources. Now, the moment we identify with any kind of story, any attack on that story, on that narrative, feels like an attack on us.
Mm.
So then, to stay safe, we try to find people who have a similar story, who agree with our story. And by that, identities, the identities that we have um, that become so near and dear to us, in essence, become boundaries. Because, like all boundaries, they can uh, define us in some ways, they can protect us in some ways. And yet, there comes a point when they become confining us, when they confine us. And so, as long as we stay within that boundary, the boundary of a particular identity, whatever that identity may be, we're going to be very prone to conflict. And the more narrow that identity, the more prone to conflict we are. The more triggered we will get if that identity is challenged in any way.
Yeah, so people are feeling like they need to defend that belief system, because they've attached it to themselves.
Mm-hmm. It's more than belief system.
Mm,
It's truly a whole narrative. You know, we process life by telling a story about it.
mm,
That's how we process everything. We process everything by having a particular narrative, and our narrative is influenced by a variety of different things, by background, you know, parents, conditioning, what we see on television, books we read, papers, everything. All of that influences that narrative. So it is more than just beliefs. In many ways, our experience becomes is that's who we are.
mm,
And so the key to really connecting with people in a meaningful way and going beyond um, many of the problems that we have right now is creating some space between our identity and us. Because ultimately,
mm,
our identity is an accumulation. It's an accumulation of ideas, information, beliefs, judgments, prejudices, etc., etc., etc. So it's ours. It's ours, but it's not us. The same with our body. You know, it's an accumulation of food. It's an accumulation of certain energy that we have gathered. Again, it's ours, but it's not us. So when we start experiencing, seeing this distinction, then there is some space between our identity and us. And then we're able to connect with people in a more meaningful way. Actually, connecting with people beyond our identities on a level that is much deeper than that.
so how does one how does a person do that when they feel so strong that they're, even if they saw the space between the two, they would maybe say to you, yeah, I see the space, I see that it's not me, but I also see that those people are wrong and I'm right.
So one of the best advices on having a conversation, you know, in these times, um, I saw was in a book by Arthur Brooks, Loving Your Enemy. And
Mm.
Arthur Brooks is not someone I would typically read. Arthur Brooks is the CEO of Heritage Foundation.
Mm.
And yet I found his book to be incredibly powerful. And some of the ideas that he talks about is dropping the culture of contempt. Because what happens right now, you know, if you and I share an identity, there is a connection on the level. We share a piece of an identity. Maybe we agree on something. But what happens to the people who don't share that identity with us? They become the others. Now,
Mm.
what does that mean, the others? And whoever the others are, whether it's immigrants, whether it's a political group, whether it's a group of people, whether it's a neighbor, doesn't matter who the others are. But the first thing that happens with the others is we dehumanize them.
Yeah.
And then we create contempt for them. So we dehumanize them by referring to them as a label, by seeing them as a caricature. And
Mm.
of course, if we see something as a caricature, which is a grotesque misrepresentation by definition, a
Mm.
grotesque misrepresentation of who they really are, and if we don't see them as human, then how could we have a conversation with them?
Mm.
And why would we
Mm.
want to value them? You know, I think the invitation that Arthur Brooks extended and that I share full-heartedly is what we have to strive for. And I don't think we want to strive for civility. If I asked you, how's your marriage? And you said to me, my husband and I are civil, I would be concerned. And I would be hoping that you're seeing a therapist, right?
Mm.
And also, tolerance is not a good standard. Again, if you said to me, well, we're tolerant, we're tolerating each other, that would not be a good place to be, right? As a relationship, as a marriage. So, what if we strive towards love, where we truly love the people we disagree with? Because only by loving them fully, unconditionally, even if we completely disagree with them, even if we believe that they are wrong, as wrong as they can be, only by loving them fully as human beings, we can engage with them. And then, then we can come up with the best ideas. Look, the challenges that we're facing, from the virus, climate change, immigration, all the other issues that this planet is facing, are very complex problems. And the solution is not one-sided. The solution is not going to only come from liberals or conservatives or this political movement or that political movement. We need all ideas.
Right.
And when we decide which ideas to adapt, we cannot look at them from the perspective of identity. We cannot look at the ideas as a liberal or as a conservative or as a woman or as a person from this background or as a person from that town. We must look at these ideas just on their own, on their merit, and then we can adapt the best path. So this was a very long answer, but I think the question calls for that because it's a complex question. I think we have to first change what we aspire to in relationship with other people. We can't just try to tolerate them or be civil with them or even respect them. We have to love them precisely because they're different from us, precisely because they disagree with us. Because look, I personally wouldn't want to live in a world that is just filled with people like me. That would be very difficult to tolerate. So, nature has tremendous diversity, and nature is inclusive. And so we have to include people and we have to love them precisely because they're different from us, precisely because they disagree with us. And then we don't see them as the other. And then we can engage with them while still loving them dearly. We can engage with them. We can believe, that they're wrong, but we don't have to attach so much to that. The moment we try to dehumanize someone, the moment we start referring to someone as, by whatever label we want to refer to them, or by creating a caricature of them, we're setting ourselves up for contempt. Yeah. And no marriage can survive when people are in contempt of each other. And no connection can happen when people are in contempt of each other. Because by very nature, when we are in contempt of someone, we no longer see them as human. Right. We no longer see them, we see just a label, we see just a caricature. And that becomes very, very dangerous when we start viewing human beings, complex, diverse human beings, as labels or as caricatures.
Yeah, it's so good. I actually just yesterday, I think it was yesterday, day before yesterday, I recorded a little episode about that. I haven't posted it yet, but it was not quite as articulate as you, but it was really about what I see is how we objectify and dehumanize people and how it can, I didn't say this in there, but I think I even see it with parents as it relates to groups of or ages of their children. Like, we kind of objectify our little toddlers as, oh, well, they're in their terrible twos. And we sort of put them in this like, oh, we just have to get through that stage, or teenagers, and we just put them in a bucket. And it's not even always a person. It could be even like a stage of life. It's even when people say things like, okay, boomer, it can happen in many different ways. It's interesting because it goes to the point that something I learned at one point really stuck with me. And it was the idea that if I walked a mile in that person's, or if I grew up as that person, if I was born into that home with those circumstances and those experiences and those values and those pain points, I would probably be doing and believing and thinking and, engaging the way that they are. And when I got that, when I really got that, it's not that I need to it's not so much like, no, under my circumstances, I might never do what they do, but I could make the argument that that's because I was really lucky. You know, I could make that argument. I mean, not to say that I didn't have my own set of traumas, but here I am in this place where I do believe righteously, maybe that I think, oh, I know the right way. Well, then when I look at another person, it's like, well, they didn't even have the opportunity to explore life from that avenue. So, of course, they think the way they think. Of course, they feel the way they feel. Of course, they're defending what they're defending. Yeah, and so that seems really, I really like the invitation to up level our expectations from civility and tolerance to love. But I still think a lot of people would say, but you know, how can I love those people? Because I hear people talk about things like, and I know this is what you're talking about, the dehumanizing, but it's like I hear people say things as if like there are people who aren't worth being alive because
Mhm.
they're that bad, and because they believe those things and they are not my, they're like I can't you know care about them. They're, you know, they just need to be like gone. And so it seems like when we're at that place of divisiveness and people have that much contempt in their hearts and so much righteousness around it, you
Mhm.
know, it seems like it's like, what's the first step that you invite people to do if they're in that place and they're watching, you know, Rachel Maddow or whomever else, and they're just like,
Mhm.
"Oh, this is what I think." I mean, I'm just giving an example because it could be Fox News too. I mean,
Sure.
whatever they're watching.
So there are a couple things. First of all, I want to touch on something you brought up, and that is walking in another person's shoes. And that brings something very important. And that brings us to really the notion of compassion. And I
Mm,
think when we talk about compassion, the first understanding we have to establish is we can never walk in another person's shoes. We can never be that other person. We can
right,
never have that person's experience. So, compassion is not about being in another person's shoes. It's realizing that we can never be another person's shoes. It's realizing actually that we don't know.
right.
Because something else that you brought up that is very important, you know, the words I know are very dangerous words. The moment we say I know, what
Mm,
happens is we close ourselves.
mhm.
It makes us feel very good. Whether we'd say, I know what this virus is about, or I know what this person is about, or I know what this world is about, it makes us feel very good. It makes us feel very important. It also confines and closes us.
Yeah.
And actually, you know, and this is a dangerous invitation since I work in higher education, but I always invite people to identify with their ignorance rather than
Mhm,
with their knowledge. Because no matter what, there's always going to be limits to our knowledge.
mhm.
Our ignorance is limitless. So when we start, but that actually is a very, very important piece of
Agree.
connecting with other people. I mean, one daily practice that I invite many people I work with to adopt is actually change in their vocabulary the words I know and any variations of that to I am open.
Mm,
From I know to I am open. Because when we're open, then there is a possibility. Then there is a possibility for engagement. Then there is a possibility to say to another person, I don't know what it's like to be in your shoes. Tell
mm,
me more. I'd like to learn. And then there is a possibility of connecting. So, another point, just to build up on what you said, is to start letting go of some of the conclusions that we have,
mm.
you know, and start asking questions. Really having the courage, and this is tremendous courage, to say what we don't know, you know, and most of the things we don't know, whether it comes to this virus, whether it comes to, you know, the nature of little blade of grass, the nature of the flower, or even who or what we are. We don't
Right,
know.
right.
We don't know. And so if we can really admit to that we don't know, then there is a possibility of opening. Now, if I could add just, you know, really, there's four steps, you know, to what you said. How do we start connecting with people?
Great.
I've thought quite a bit about it, and there are 4 steps that I very often teach of what it takes. The first step is having a daily practice of tuning inward,
Mhm.
whether it's meditation, whether it's contemplation, whatever is the practice that someone uses. But the key here is that it is something regular. It is something that we do, like brushing our teeth. Why is that important? Because by doing that, that's what we start creating. We start creating that space.
Mhm.
We start creating that understanding that what we thought was us is actually ours. So then we start asking deeper questions of ourselves. Well, what is this thing? Who am I? And it takes practice to sit with the unknown, to sit in silence, to maintain these practices. And naturally, when we start doing these practices, the way that we are changes.
Mhm.
We start becoming more open, more tolerant, more curious, because we start realizing how little we know about what this is. I think this second step is learning to observe without evaluating. Just about everything we say, if we really pay attention, is a conclusion, judgment, or label of some sort. And actually, one of the first practices in terms of observation without evaluation is changing the way we listen. Because most of the time we're listening to someone else before they're done with their first breath. We've already made a conclusion. We've already evaluated them. We already put them in a box, put a label on that box, and we are ready to ship them.
Yep.
So really becoming aware of that and learning to observe without evaluating. And actually something we talk quite a bit about, active listening. Active listening is something that many people talk about, very few people actually know how to do.
Mhm.
But that involves not just listening to the words, but tuning in, really tuning in. And this is where the first practice also comes in very handy. Tuning in to the emotion and energy behind the words, and then reflecting it back to the person, really making sure before we go into any kind of discussion, before we say you're right or you're wrong or anything like that, just making sure that we heard them,
Yeah.
that we heard them. And that's very powerful. The Indian mystic Jada Krishnamurti, one of the greatest Indian philosophers of the 20th century, has said observation without evaluation is the highest form of intelligence.
Mm.
And I think very few of us actually practice that.
Mhm.
Because everything we see, we hear on television, on the news, on the radio, even newspapers, even what we consider to be news, still, still is based on evaluation, opinion, judgment, label, and so forth. The next step is expansion. And this is something that we started talking about. Part of the expansion is realizing how little we know. And
Mm.
instead of connecting with our knowledge, beginning with connecting with our ignorance, with what we don't know.
Mhm.
So, as a daily practice, replacing the words I know with I am open. I am open. If we could just try that, anytime we want to mentally say, oh, I know what this situation is about, I know what this person is about, if we can just shift and say, I'm open, I'm
Yeah.
open. That's the first step of expansion. Now, the next step of expansion is moving beyond our positions. So, most of the time, when we disagree with someone, we start with positional statements. And that's the most superficial level on which we have a dialogue, on which we talk to each other. And when I teach this, I often use an image of an iceberg. And so on the iceberg, the very tip of the iceberg is positions. Now, right underneath that are interests. For
Mm.
25, 30 years, Harvard Negotiation Project was telling us that interest is kind of the end all and be all. And they were teaching interest based
Mm.
negotiations. in interest-based conflict resolution. But I still think, in my experience, interests are still quite superficial level. It may be intellectually why we think something. We need to go much deeper. So the next level is emotion, energy in motion that is behind our words. What are our words stirring within us? Or as Marshall Rosenberg, the founder of nonviolent communication, described, what is alive within us?
Mm.
As we are speaking these words, what is truly happening? What is happening within us? Really, really tuning in to that. So then we go to emotions, which are really right at the water level. Now, for us to really start getting to the depth, we need to go to values. And finally, and most importantly, we need to start connecting with the needs.
Mm-hmm.
And when we start connecting with the needs, no matter who we are, no matter what our political beliefs, no matter how differently we may look or live, our needs are identical.
Yeah.
We all have a need for security. We all have a need for autonomy. We all have a need for authenticity,
Yeah.
for connection, for beauty, for meaning, and for expansion.
Mm.
And when we start connecting with those needs, the nature of the conversation changes.
Yeah.
And then the final step I'd like to mention is exploration. So, this is again shifting how we see conflicts and disagreements. What if we saw conflicts and disagreements as adventures, as
Mm-hmm.
opportunities to explore, as opportunities to learn something about ourselves or the other person? Look, if I told you about a great mystery movie and I really would invite you to go see it, would you want to know how it ends?
Probably not.
Right? You would want to experience that thrill,
Yeah.
right? You would want to stay there and guess who, I don't know who did it. I don't know what happened. Maybe
Right.
this person. You want to have that experience. So when we engage in conflict, if we drop the idea of should, that
Mm-hmm.
this conflict, this experience should look this way or should end this way, or I'm going to try to manipulate the situation to get what I think I should get, we drop that and we become open. And this becomes an exploration and this becomes this mystery. Wow, I don't know how this is going to turn out. Maybe I'm going to learn something new from this. Maybe I'm going to emerge as a different being from that. We then will view conflict and connection and dialogue in a very different way.
Wow, that is so helpful. The invitation to first just sit in some type of um, turning inward process.
Mhm.
Um, that seems like a lot of people are giving that suggestion. So it's not that foreign to most people. And
Mhm.
I'm with you that it really is where we begin to create the space between who we think we are, all
Mhm.
those narratives that we believe are, are who we are, which I guess that's what you're saying. They're kind of like they're ours, but they're not us. Right? Is that what you said? They're
Yeah,
ours, but they're not us. Yeah, I like that
correct.
distinction. And it's like something we're carrying around with us, but not something that actually is us. So beginning to create that. In fact, I have a practice every morning, and it's actually I have it right here. It's called my let go and know list.
Mm.
And on my list, the first thing I write every single day that I'm letting go of is knowing and answers, and that
Mm.
I know what's right, because it's just what I've concluded gets in the way of
Mhm.
everything. And ultimately one of my deepest values is connection. And so
Mhm.
if one of my deepest values is connection, but when you say something, it triggers me and then I'm out of the ability to connect with you, then that's not serving my needs, and usually not serving anyone's needs. So what do you think about the person though who is sitting there saying, I want to, and I know it, and everything you're saying really sounds good, and I do meditate and I do all these things, but I do also find myself triggered. What can I do in the moment to keep myself engaged in this conversation?
So the first thing that is important is to have a distinction between reaction and a response.
Mm,
So most of the time we react. And what is a reaction? It's our attempt to escape or control whoever or whatever is triggering us.
Mm-hmm.
And our nervous system actually does not distinguish between being chased by a tiger or between being triggered by, someone we love or a partner or children. So what happens when we're triggered in any way? Um, the brain activity moves away from the prefrontal cortex, which is the area, the largest part of the brain, the area we use to connect with other people, the area we use for empathy, the area we use for analytical thinking, all the things that are important for us as we try to connect. And all of our brain activity is going to the brain stem. And brain stem is only concerned with keeping us safe,
Mm.
escaping or controlling, escaping or controlling. So when we understand that, the first part is just noticing that we're triggered,
Yeah.
that something or someone is triggering us. And when we notice, then we have an opportunity to interrupt. Now, there's many different tools for interrupting. I know you're familiar, Deb, with Michael Brown and his work in the presence process. And so yes, yes. So the connected breathing, I actually very often teach and use a version of the connected breathing technique uh, that Michael Brown teaches in his book, and that is he uses a slightly longer version. I always teach people I am here now, using that with the breath. Inhaling I, exhaling am, inhaling here, exhaling now. So if we feel that we're triggered, and mostly what's triggering us is some story about the past or some story about the future, right?
Mm.
This is, we're either in the shoots or we're in what happened 10 years ago,
Yeah.
right? We are not in what's happening now.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a powerful way by engaging in this breathing technique. And I do this all the time, even with my eyes open. I am here now. And I'm here now, I can breathe, I can engage with this. I actually teach a much more elaborate process called dissolving conflict from within that teaches people just that, of how to move from reaction to responding.
Mm.
Because what is a response? Response is an action from an undisturbed state.
Mm.
If we can maintain an undisturbed state, then we can do what is needed in the moment. And by the way, sometimes what is needed is for us to be very fiery. Actually, our response is connected to the elements. Our body has all the elements. So sometimes the appropriate response is fire.
Mm.
Sometimes, and it's totally appropriate for the situation, as long as our inner state is undisturbed. You
Yeah.
have children. Have there been times when you had to make a point to keep them safe or whatever, and maybe you raise your voice and maybe you give a very fiery response? Now, it doesn't mean you don't love your kids. And maybe even in the back of your mind, you may say, wow, what they did is quite clever.
Right.
But you have to act angry, and you have to set appropriate boundaries, right?
Yeah. Well, there are times when I have to have something that is important, but not necessarily that I'm activated in the
Yeah,
moment. Yeah.
exactly. And so then you're acting from an undisturbed state. You're taking an appropriate action for the moment, but your state is not disturbed. You're not seeing them as some kind of evil beings. Are not human, but you need, at that point, that's what life is calling on you. Sometimes the appropriate response is earth. You become very motherly, and you really nurture whoever is triggering you. Sometimes the appropriate response is air. You speak your truth. Sometimes it's ether. You rise above it. So the appropriate response comes from all the elements. I want to dispel the notion that a response is always going to be someone sitting in a meditative posture and being pacifist or being disengaged. That's completely not what I'm saying. It's what's happening within. It's where it's coming from.
Yeah.
And then if the inner state is undisturbed, then we can take the appropriate right action
Hmm.
for the situation. And as I said, sometimes it can be very fierce action. Sometimes we roar like a lion, and sometimes it can be very nurturing, very soft action, depending on what life is calling on us for. So this is where the breathing technique that we talked about comes in, meditation comes in. By consistently, and I emphasize consistently, practicing that, and having a consistent practice, we consistently start having and start living in an undisturbed state. So then, no matter what happens, whether we're in lockdown or quarantine, whether times are good or times are bad, whatever challenges come, we're able to respond to them appropriately. Our inner state does not get disturbed. And that's really the primary purpose, the primary reason for meditation and doing those practices. That consistently we start being in a state where our inner state is not disturbed. It's consistent. And then with some distance from our story and us, our identity and us, more and more we can start taking the appropriate action, take very strong action, and yet be joyous, be at peace, be at ease inside.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's really good. And I think for to remind people that that's the intention behind the meditation and our practices of contemplation. It's not what I think a lot of people get taught is like, oh, it's going to give you peace, it's going to in that moment, like that's what you're looking for. And often for me, my meditations can be very turbulent. It's not that they're peaceful, but it's created that space for me as well. And I want to just tell people, I know countless people who have experienced some version of the states you're talking about, at least being able to have it available to them to respond and not react. And I know for me, it depends on the circumstances. I would say many, many things I'm undisturbed by. But now the good news is when I am disturbed, I can notice it. I can feel it. I can experience my body sensations and know that I'm being triggered in this moment. I know that it's about something inside of me, and I'm able to navigate that, to find my way, to be able to respond and come into right action rather than to take action, even if it does take me a couple of days. Even if it does take me a little time, it might not be in that moment. I might have to walk away from that moment. But I also really like the invitation that it's not just Buddha sitting on the Buddha, sitting like a Buddha on the mat and you just say nothing and do nothing. There's actually a lot of action that can come from this. It's just, as you said, it's coming from that place of an undisturbed, regulated nervous system, right, rather than the activated, angry, I'm just acting from unconsciousness. You said, we've talked about it through this whole thing, but that if we can get beyond this idea of the stories, the narrative that we have that we're attached to, this identity, and then we go to this place of the who we really are, the you,
Mm-hmm.
that there's something available to us in connection there. And
Mm-hmm.
that's, I think you said something like, it's like moving beyond those and, these positions and I know that you had an experience, and if people want to listen to it, I'll include your YouTube videos of your TED Talk and your other one, but that when you were out on a motorcycle and this
Mm-hmm.
experience that you talked about of just becoming connected to you and to the others in a way that
Mm-hmm.
was beyond any of that. Yeah, would you be willing to share, just even like dip your toe into that for people to understand what's available?
Sure, sure, sure. So, I guess 2 years ago, in the summer of 2018, um, I went on a very deeply spiritual journey with my teacher. I rode a motorcycle across the Himalayas, and in many ways, like many spiritual experiences, it was a very challenging experience. People crave a spiritual experience. And it can be wonderful after the fact. When it's happening, it's hell. It's living
Right.
hell. But
Right.
this experience really challenged me in many, many ways, because I love riding motorcycles, but I really, frankly, I'm not a great motorcycle rider, and I've struggled with skills and techniques that are required to do. And you know, riding in some of the most dangerous roads in the world, um, at, at altitude, you know, up to 18,000 feet and over, um, really brings out kind of every possible challenge that you can imagine. So during this journey, as I was riding and going through, you know, the routine, and sometimes spending 16, 18 hours a day in a motorcycle saddle, riding some very challenging, very technical roads in the Himalayas, sometimes being lost, uh, kind of not knowing anything. Um, as I was riding more and more, all the things that I thought were important,
Mm.
so my likes, my dislikes, my opinions, my judgments, my, you know, all the things that I would talk about. If someone asked me, well, who are you? And my profession, education, all of those things, they were completely irrelevant. They were becoming less and less important with every mile I went. And yet, and I thought, you know, before, my experience was connecting with someone took really, if I have a story and you have a story, and there's some commonality. So maybe we went to the same college, maybe we live in the same town, maybe, you know, we support the same political candidate, or maybe we both like Jeeps, or whatever it is. That would be our point of connection, and that's how we connect. But during this journey in the Himalayas, I realized actually that that connection, you know, can be nice. It still happens, but it's a very, very superficial connection. I actually realized that I could connect more with myself and with other people when all of those things, all the likes, all the things that I thought made up who I was, were completely irrelevant or very distant.
Mm.
And then the connection that I was experiencing with myself, with other beings, it's not just people, with other beings, went beyond, and it's went frankly beyond anything that I could describe. Because the people who were with me on this journey, you know, as we were covered with mud, dirty, smelly, tired, you know, getting through the day on a motorcycle, what we did for a living, or where we lived, or what was our first language, or some other story or nonsense that ordinarily would, you know, connect us, was completely irrelevant.
Mm.
And yet, and yet, the level of connection I felt with these folks, and the level of connection I felt within me, actually not even knowing what this was. I didn't even, because if everything that I thought was me was kind of dropping out and didn't feel all that important and relevant, and, you know, it really felt like, well, this was all mine. This was luggage that I carried, but now this luggage is not serving me. It's not me. So I wasn't even clear who this is, what this is.
Right.
And yet the level of connection I was experiencing within me was even deeper. And so this journey really culminated when we summited at 18,350 feet at the Kardingla Pass, right near the border with Tibet, in northern India, where, you know, you're standing on top of this mountain. As far as you could see, there are Himalayas. You feel this small.
Yeah.
You feel this small. You realize this mountain, you know, one slight move from this mountain, you're gone.
Oof.
And you feel like you're a pop-up. You know, you're just a pop-up. Like this mountain has stood there for thousands and thousands of years. In the life of that mountain, you know, you're so insignificant. And then Everest was another 10,000 feet up, and we could barely breathe at 18,000. And Everest is another 10,000 feet up. So that moment, as I stood there, there was, on one hand, this sense of nothingness,
Mm.
and in the other sense, this absolute experience of connection,
Mm.
where to some point, to some extent, you almost don't know where you end and another being begins. And it was completely incomprehensible experience, indescribable experience. But something really that gave me an insight into what it really takes to connect with another being. And what I discovered is it's not finding some intersection in our story, but it is actually going beyond the story. And it is seeing that being beyond their story, beyond, this is a man or a woman, or this is what this person looks like, or this is where this person is from. And that connection is indescribable. And to this day, when I get together with the folks who I went on this journey with, and they were very different, the age range was from 21 to 82. People from all over the world, very different personalities, and all wonderful people, but just very different life experiences, different points in their lives. And we don't communicate necessarily all that often. But the moment we are anywhere near each other, there is an immediate connection, an immediate experience of going beyond of some superficial thing that this person is presenting themselves in the world, that this person in a much deeper way.
Wow. I love it. It really is pushing my edges a little bit in a good way. I love to have my edges pushed because it's just helping me to see something that's available that maybe I haven't personally experienced, but that's available to us. And I mean, people talk about these oneness experiences and these experiences with, unity and, and I just appreciate I kind of know that that's there. And that probably that we're experiencing it all the time and we're just not seeing it because we have all kinds of layers of protection and stories and narratives and all of that luggage. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's a beautiful story. I could even at one point, I really felt you. You gave me just a teeny glimpse of it in a way that I just appreciate. I felt warmth. And I felt a connection to you that got me just a tiny bit welled up for a second. So I really appreciate your story. And I hope other people can, maybe just see that maybe it seems so out of touch for some people because it's like out of grasp because we haven't experienced it. But I think the more we hear people who have experienced it, the more that we get to learn from each other. So I appreciate that. Great. Well, so that has been such interesting, insightful, just like so much goodness in there and so concrete. Like your path of how to help people to be in connection with one another is so concrete. And I think a lot of people just don't know what to do. They don't know. So I appreciate you generously sharing that with everybody. And I'd love to pivot to another conversation that is so totally related, but just a slight tweak to it. And I'm just so excited to talk to you about this. So, all right. So, Henry, you work at a college, a university, a large public university. And before we got on the call and we started recording, I asked you a question because my son is entering his freshman year at college in the fall. And so we started to talk about the question of is it a good idea to send our kids off to college? Considering that we are in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic and that schools may not even be open. They might be open, but they're doing online school. And I just appreciated so much and resonated so much with your response. And I would love for you to share, share with other people your thoughts about that.
Well, thank you. I think I have to preface this response with a few things. First of all, I'm no expert in higher education. I'm very new to it, and my role in higher education, I work in essentially what is the Civil Rights Office, and I direct the conflict resolution program within the Civil Rights Office and teach people how to deal with conflict and also how to create more equitable, diverse, accessible campus. where every member of the campus community feels welcome and feels like they can express themselves in whatever way they express themselves. So that's my role. With that said, I think we are at times when life is really pointing to us that we don't know.
Mm.
You know, people say that these are uncertain times. I'm not sure I've seen ever certain times. Um, Times are always uncertain. But certainly, this is for our generation, for this generation. And I mean, generation, I don't just mean age, I mean people who are alive right now, people who are going
Right.
to school, you know, people who are parents. Um, this is really unprecedented.
Mm.
So we don't, no one knows how this is going to play out and turn out. But in this fact that it's bringing this home for us, there is an immense opportunity. There is an immense opportunity to go beyond mine, what I want and what is important for me and my experience to something greater, something bigger. And this is really a tremendous opportunity to serve and to expand in that way. And what do we mean by service? You know, in this time, is it necessarily going feeding, you know, someone on the street or um, working at the front lines of fighting the COVID-19 pandemic? Well, certainly, if someone has the skill and experience, and that may be the way they show up. But ultimately, what service is about our ability to respond to everything.
Mm.
Our ability to respond to everything. And really, and this is something that a very deep lesson that I'm still learning from Sadhguru, who's a very, very um, profound Indian mystic and yogi, modern Indian mystic and yogi. And that is the experience, the practice, the experience, and the state of. All three are important: the practice, the experience, and the state of responding to life.
Mm.
And as we said, responding is an action from an undisturbed state. Now, sometimes the extent of our action could be limited. So let's say we hear on TV there's something happening in the Philippines. We may not be able to do anything about it. But does it move us in some way? Does it touch us in some way? And then if we can do something about it, are we doing something about it? So, in a way, when we respond, we place the well being of others above the well being of ourselves. And by doing that, this is another very relevant practice to tie it back to the conversation that we had earlier of creating some space between our identity and us.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we place in however way we can, in however way we can, and as I said, for some people, it may be just offering a listening ear to someone else. For someone else, it may be putting their family first right now and finding creative ways to serve the children or to serve the family, that the immediate family they're living in. For someone else, it may be just offering a smile, you know, or namaste to someone we encounter in the street. So it's not, again, it can look in many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
But even for a moment, when we put the well being of others above ourselves without seeking anything from it,
Mm.
that's the important piece. We actually disconnect from our story. Our
Mm.
story in that moment becomes a little bit less important. You know, when 9/11 happened, when a lot of other terrible tragedies happened, tsunami in India, and even with what's happening now, there is actually an opportunity. We get a little bit removed, right? from our own individual story, our own individual narrative.
Mm.
And we get connected to the fact that we're here for a very short time, that we're very vulnerable. It takes a tiny little virus, someone sneezing, and this life could end. And then from there, we're able to start putting this life in perspective and to serve by responding fully, unconditionally to all aspects of life that are in front of us. Because we start seeing ourselves now as some immortal, superhuman being where death only happens to other people, right? But we start seeing ourselves as finite. This life at some point is going to end. So, what do we want this life to stand for? How do we want to serve the fellow human being? How do we want to respond to them? Do we want at the end of this life to just be about me and mine? Again, all of those are going to be possessions. We won't be able to take it with us. Or are we going to put something greater than us in front of us and then be able to respond fully to that in whatever way we can? As I said, sometimes it may be just tuning in to the feeling of sadness. We see something happening in the Philippines. We may not be able to do anything about it. But just tuning in to that experience that we can never be in those people's shoes, but just by virtue of being human, we can connect with their pain. That's compassion.
Yeah.
We can never be in their shoes, but just by virtue of being human, we can connect with their experience of pain.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I think that it's funny. It's the premise of Inside Out activism is to look at the things that you see out in the world that either upset you or anger you or that you wish would change, and then to be able to come to what it is that you can do. And usually, it does start like for a lot of people, if they don't have available to them to respond in that way and they are reactive, that would just be sitting on a cushion in the morning and starting to meditate. That can be, and then, but there's a way that it's like right now we are being called, it's almost our duty to
Mm-hmm.
do whatever we can be doing to contribute to the greater good. But like one of the things I see is that a lot of people around me, I think they want to do something big. They feel like the only thing that would be valuable is to do something big, or it is to do something that's tangible, like to go deliver food to somebody. But what I hear is an invitation for all of us to do. It's like, no, it does actually start with us. It starts with our hearts. It starts with, a lot of people want peace in the world, but people don't have peace in their own hearts. They are warring with themselves. And my invitation to people is one of the most radical acts that you can do is to
Mm-hmm.
cultivate peace in your own heart first.
See, what you're bringing up is something so important because, as we talked about before, response is an action from an undisturbed state. So, if we begin with a disturbed state, then no matter what we're doing, whether we're delivering food or whether we're working in medicine, but if we start with a disturbed state, with a state of anxiety, with a state of fear, that's what we're delivering to the world
Yeah.
through our actions. The action may take whatever form they take, but that's ultimately what we're delivering to the world. So the most important aspect of action is where that action is coming from.
Mm.
I'm noticing now a lot of people actually very busy. People are trying to stay busy. They're doing a million posts today on Facebook, on social media, doing whatever that they're doing. And I could just sense, just tuning in a little bit, I could just sense that this becomes an expression of their own anxiety. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. These are certainly very anxious times. But we have to be just aware where this is coming from. And sometimes the best thing we can do, the best service we can bring to the humanity, and this is, I think, especially relevant now, is do nothing.
Yes.
Because it's not about doing anything. It's not about doing anything. It's actually about the way we show up to the world.
Yeah. Yep.
And then if we show up to the world from a certain inner space, from a place of inner peace, from a place of undisturbed state of mind, then no matter what we do, we're creating that in the world. We could be just sitting in the park, or just sitting in our meditation, and we're contributing to the better place, to the better world, and vice versa. Um, there could be a lot of activity, but if it's all coming from anxiety and from fear, it has that quality no matter what we do.
Yeah.
And that's what it creates and contributes to.
Yeah.
Right.
Cool. Thank you, Henry. Oh my gosh. I feel like we could probably have 10 other this type of conversations, but just in, like, and we
Right.
will. We will. We'll
Good.
talk
Good.
again. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it, Deb, too. Thank you.
All
I had a
right.
lot of fun. It's wonderful to connect with you. And thank you for bringing into the world what you're bringing in.
Mm,
I think these conversations you're having with people are very important. And it's an opportunity to serve, and it's an opportunity to uplift people now, these challenging times. And it's an opportunity, to bring something that is not just information or entertainment, but really allows people to have a deeper connection in this way. And I thank you for that, for bringing this into the world. I think that's very much needed, and for practicing what you preach,
mm,
what both of us preach.
mm.
So thank you for that.
Yeah. Thank you too. Really, truly. It's been an honor.
Beautiful, beautiful.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.